Good evening. This is Misael Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, with my brother Keenan Booker, and we're here for the OG Den, where we talk
Yes,
about history, politics, science, and esoteric studies and culture. So today we'll be having an extension of our discussion on plagues with author Keenan Booker from his book Kicked Out of Heaven, which is a 3-volume series, and we'll be discussing some points um, from the second volume. I want to kind of also get into right quick. I got to get Keenan's view on this video. Like, what is up with the political world and Joe Biden? So I'm going to share this video, and I want to get your um, view if I can get it to come up. I don't know if I can get it to come up.
Here we go. Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. So let's take a look at what this dude is
Okay.
saying.
Okay.
Proudly for Holloway. Proudly for your dad. First African American state senator in the state of Delaware. Everything about. And by the way, I sit on the stand and again
Turn the volume up if you can.
Okay.
that turn that
Let me go back.
turn and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down.
Yo, the white man.
So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I love kids jumping on my lap. And I tell you what, the men, they're now all men, the guys I work with down here, and they're all guys at the time. They're all good men. Most of them made an awful lot of themselves. And Earl Larkin had a rough time.
Oh, man.
Some of you knew Earl. I came back as a public defender.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Okay, hold on. Let me
B,
let me stop this.
y'all don't know that white man, bro.
Oh,
Y'all don't know that white man.
Crazy, B. I had to.
You want to know the God honest truth? What I just saw right there.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
I saw what hit me in volume 1 when I was studying the jesters and the jokers.
Mm-hmm.
And if that was the first time in life where it hit me that a wrestler was a 45-year-old white man jumping up and down in the ring. Yeah, you see what it just happened to your head right there?
Yeah.
Jumping up and down. This is a 40-year-old, 50-year-old white man jumping up and down in the ring. Okay? Throwing chairs at another motherfucker, bro. Now think about this shit now. Some of the motherfuckers is what, damn near 60, 70 by now?
Yeah.
Hogan is the president? Oh, come on, bro. Like, that was the first time I said, yo. I said, this is 40-year-old, 50-year-old white man. He's supposed to be the stockbroker and shit. He's supposed to be the CEO, CFO, but you don't even see it, though.
Yeah.
When you're watching wrestling.
Yeah.
You don't see that it's, you know what I'm saying? And then the context of what they played on your head on what the white male is supposed to be, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then when Hulk Hogan isn't in the ring, he falls right back into default white male space when he put on a suit and you're respecting him on that line. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even though he was just fucking half butt ass naked up in the ring, jumping up and down with another dude, throwing each other around, achieving a bunch of nothing, doing nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what you just seen. And then there's another layer of what we just saw right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the political stuff that went on during the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. They had a lot of different groups
Mm-hmm.
And I mean innumerable, okay,
Yeah.
amount of groups that were political groups, revolutionary groups, caused wars, you know, they raided, lynchings, standing on top of the house and riling up the people and all of that, doing the parade,
Yeah.
doing the party, yeah, all of that. They've mastered those elements real hardcore during the 1600s, 1700s. And there is an insanity point. And the insanity point is that, humans will never be able to get away from Babel.
Mm.
The Babel is the mouth, the plague, the plaque,
Mm-hmm.
And there's a point where everything just goes turkey, gobble, 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 gobble. And this is an insanity point that white males understand, and they'll hit these insanity points right in front of you. And a lot of people don't know what they're looking at, but you may be looking at a genetical throwback with the LSD and a lot of other things that have went on. And because you see it rampant in their drawings and paintings from the medieval time, you see that, I mean, to go detailed, okay, like the spin tops, the spin top with the strings that you give to your children now.
Yeah.
Back in the medieval times, these things used to be big. They used to be real big. And the adult idiots would be playing with these in the middle of the street. You can see them in the painting. Yeah. And I'm saying this in relation of the Igor mentality. I'm saying this in the relation of the loss of mental space. And the loss of mental space while, still holding some form of sustenance with existence. And that's basically what you're seeing right there.
Yeah.
And that what you also saw can be comparative to a collapse zone. And this can also go to the McLeod syndrome. But when I say the collapse zone, I mean, white males, they'll go real hard in the business, 10 years or whatever the case, and then they'll just collapse and disappear to Brazil for 2 years and be gone off drugs, be walking around in the desert, messing around, doing all types of crazy sexual shit. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then they say they're on a great journey, and then they'll come back, and then all the frat brothers are like, hey, okay, where you been? You okay, man? Your wife didn't leave you, man. Your wife wants to divorce you, whatever the case. Get back in there, and then they come back to the company, and they advance the company 10, 20-fold, basically, of what they did when they left. You see what I'm saying? So,
I mean, it's kind of like, it's crazy because this dude, here's a strong possibility of getting elected. I haven't really drew up the election at this point because I haven't seen any debates. So you have one side of the camp saying they're trying to postpone the election, the other side of the camp saying they don't agree to debates. But I think Biden, it's kind of interesting because I think you might have saw a post I had did on social media where this dude's son was dating his brother's widow and then got this other girl pregnant. You know what I'm saying? And this was all that stuff that kind of came out, when his son went overseas. And I think Trump was getting investigated on some stuff as far as I forget the country, but it all came out through that investigation. So it's kind of interesting to see all this crazy stuff on, man. This thing is like, this dude does not have, he has cognitive issues.
well, yeah, they go through a lot of mental pressure.
Yeah.
And they go through a lot of, they get far more forced on education than what others do,
Yeah.
And from what I've experienced with this study, I felt the nerves in my brain switch around.
Yeah. I mean,
Studying.
the levels of human socialization, not really socialization, but just behavior could be extreme in a lot of different incidents. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what you have in volume 2 of Kicked Out of Heaven with Sex and the Plague. So in the first episode last week, well, earlier this week we discussed about the plague and how influential it was, and COVID's status versus what real plague is. But today, let's talk about sex in the plague because, I mean, that must have been something interesting because people have a desire to reproduce. Evidently, people were still being born into the world. Maybe some people didn't think they had the plague and got into some stuff, and I'm sure it just affected like the whole social climate at that time. So, were there any, like, when you have this chapter, Sex and the Plague, specifically around the time of the Black Death in the 1300s, right? What were some of the sexual practices that was going on at that time in adjustment to the plague?
Well, um,
Or perception towards sex, I would say that.
sex during that time period stemmed on a wide range of elements. Okay. When it comes down to specifically the plague, as I think I stated this in the last video, there's a biological threat. So with that biological threat, a lot of women were they forgot all social order, shall I say.
Hmm.
And they went and mated with vagabonds, boys, kids, whatever males that were alive, because as it's stated in repetition, it was usually grown males that were the ones that were dying from plague.
Mm.
The majority of the times, depending on the plague, like sometimes, like there was a dysentery plague that only took out children. Usually dysentery would only attack children.
Mm.
So, you know, and when things like this are witnessed, the women who usually did not have large numbers when it came to plague deaths would respond with this biological threat by having liaisons with any applicable partner, whether they be somebody with leprosy
Hmm.
or they be somebody with syphilis. And you have to understand that leprosy and syphilis, you couldn't really tell the difference in between the two.
Mm.
Right. They're considered to be both one and the same by today's medical doctors. Now, um, women would, of course, mate with who they would have to mate to, regardless of their medical position. And what I was going to say about the leprosy and the syphilis is that it put down very hardcore disfigurements of the face. It rotted off your fingertips. It crippled your legs. It melted your skull, sort of, kinda, and it could put
Wow.
cracks and holes in your skull. And it rotted out your teeth. It specifically would rot off the nose area. It would bend in the bones on your face. And all of this was the status of syphilis until the 1800s when penicillin was discovered.
Mm.
When penicillin started being used, which I think is bovine or something like that. I I don't want to get you can't quote me on that. But it was penicillin. I was gonna try and describe what penicillin is, but I'm not
Hmm.
there right now. But penicillin, once that was introduced, it stopped all of the disfigurements from syphilis.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
So that was an enforcement. Now, another thing was there was a lot of other situations of being locked up in homes. There's a lot of other situations of abandonment. So, and then there was a lot of other situations of sex being a healer, which you have to understand that the medieval times was standing on top of information from ancient Egypt, which I just was reading documentation of ancient Egypt medical papyri, and it clearly states human excrement was being used. So that
Wow.
states that, yeah, in certain medicines. And this is also for Greece. This is also for Rome. This is also for medieval.
Hmm.
You see. So, um, with that being stated, and also these medical documents, not only Egypt, but you can find that in the Tao of China. that, their sex is a healer. And they understood this as well in the medieval times.
Okay.
And then you have the afflictions of the fetish or, one's personal kick, which all humans are fetishes when you really get down to the definition of what a fetish is. And when you also understand the sexual development of the human psyche. So I believe that if I was to get real fine tuned with the details in this area, I could probably most definitely show that there was an expansion of what we would call today sexual pathology or hardcore fetishes that were created after the plague because of the experience of death. And not only that, the smells. The smell of death alone creates nightmares in the mind. So due to the fact they had rotted bodies around and we had pits of rotted bodies around them and in the air, you best believe that the smells that they were dealing with had an affliction towards their sexual practice.
Wow.
Right.
Wow, that's wild, man. Because just I guess the grotesque merged with sexual union is
Yeah.
is pretty morbid to say the least. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, you
So
got necrophilia, you got coprophilia. Coprophilia is the love of feces. Necrophilia is the love of having sex with a dead body. So just because these are real classifications and categories, they've had to had occur,
now,
And go ahead.
what was okay when I hear stuff like that? I think of like the the I mean human beings, the behavior can sometimes be totally uh, ill in comparison to how we're living today, like by majority. I think things still going on in different parts of the world, but it's generally agreed that certain things are just completely taboo. You know what I'm saying? Although they still exist. You know what I'm saying? What was the force that kind of rectified a lot of those practices? Like, like what got people more abreast to where they're at today as far as like sexual? Because I like, how did they get to arriving to some of the morals that we have today from coming from that era?
Well, okay. Well, you have to understand there was a break,
Hmm.
and the break is the Victorian age, which happens late 1700 going into 1800. That's why you see them wearing all black. Black is the color of rebirth.
Hmm.
So during the Victorian age, there was a whole rebirth of civilization, which was the Americanism that was being structured and the culture that was being developed, right? So before that time, when you want to talk about the picture of the Black Death, their reliance and sexual understanding was based on religion, the Catholic way. And the Catholic way of that time, you weren't allowed to have sex on Fridays. There was strict rule on sex, okay? And sex was only supposed to be done on certain days. I think Wednesday was an allowance day. But that information is detailed in the volume 3.
Okay. So
And go ahead.
would you say that the church was a factor of civility during this time? To
Of
kind of
stability?
of civility.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. The church always enforced, but you have to understand that, like I stated in the last video we did, the medieval times was balanced, and the Catholic system is a balanced thinking system. Our Western and our modern Americanism is trying to enforce one way, and that's the happy, happy, joy, joy. And there's no exception of balance, and anything else that's not happy, happy, joy, joy, or quote unquote positive is automatically a negative and not to be associated with. Okay. But positive and negative are, the scales. So that is the true way on the Catholic system of thinking, and also all of the medieval times. So when it comes to the experiences of the Black Plague and the multitude of other plagues that occurred throughout this time period of 1300s and 1700s, you have to understand there's a lot of children that were, and as I was stated earlier, your sexual psyche and your reward system um, that is a part of your sexual psyche is developed throughout time. So if you live through plagues and you're watching witches get burned at the stake and you're watching soldiers go to war and you don't know when you're gonna, see your mate again, and I mean, during these times, the average 25-year-old girl may had already had, 6 kids, 5 of them died. She probably already had 3 husbands. 2 of them probably killed as a criminal, and one just disappeared off the ship somewhere, or he's been gone at work for 6 months on ship,
Yeah.
And this is at 25 years old. This is already their status.
Wow. Yeah, because that
Yeah,
time life was really hard.
Oh yeah. Bro, there's pictures that can validate a lot of the stuff that I'm saying. If you want to talk about the extremes of poverty, which has traumatized them to be in the extremes of security that they're in right now.
Definitely, yeah, it's needed for survival to kind of get through something. Because even when you look at what's going on today with COVID, I would say that that's like we had discussed earlier, not plague, but I would definitely say as far as the level of global recognition, it stirs up a certain fear, and you kind of see who's doing what in the fallout. Like some people would say, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna use this as an opportunity of rebirth. Let me get like yourself, let me get my writing on. Although you was doing it before COVID, but let me get some things on progressively to think how I'm gonna survive in this." Some people may fold. Some people may just collapse. You know what I'm saying? Where they go out and do all sorts of horrendous crimes and stuff like that. There's a lot of different ways people are affected, but in some ways, it's a rebirth in the sense of where the individual is going to go and society is going to go. So I would think, like at that time, also, to survive all of that, you have a lot of people like, well, we ain't doing this again, and in some ways became smarter through exercising that survival. You know what I'm saying? Where because I think all nations had dealt with it, but in certain areas, some nations didn't really write stuff down, so they were liable to make the same mistakes over again. Where others did, and it just became like an epic form of study. Probably like the era when we get out of this, people will probably look at this time period, however it lasts, the whole 2020, and study it for a couple of years, and then it will fade into something else. You know what I'm saying? But the main thing is like, the survival strength of the individual, and not everyone's kind of prepared in whatever ways to do certain things, you know what I'm saying? So it's really, survival is always the highest law, you know what I'm saying? And how people adhere to that law really deals with the prosperity that they can enjoy in their life. You know what I'm saying? So that, I mean, it's kind of interesting because you never really think about the dynamics of the plague, the Black Death at that time, and how people were able to get on a family life and stuff like that. I mean, especially when you have like the mother dying, the father got to take care of the children, and all this sort of thing. So I can imagine at that time that the church, the standards, well, let me hear it from yourself because you're very much aware of it. So I would imagine that the church at that time inspired a lot of faith, in the people to keep moving forward. Would that be a correct statement?
They couldn't. They tried, but they
Mhm.
couldn't.
Mhm.
You know, the human psyche can only deal with so much. You know, and when it comes to solutions, it falls into a what is it called? It falls into a you know, a process of
Yeah.
you know, but this isn't working, go to the next. This isn't working, go to the
Yeah.
next. This isn't
Process of
working, go to the
elimination.
next.
Yeah.
Yeah, process of elimination, you know. And that's what I meant to say. But yeah, and the process of elimination becomes real quick when babies are dying. I mean, you have to understand there's no cars, there's no TVs
Mhm.
during this time. You know, you don't know. You're hearing screams out of random houses down the street because people are discovering people dead in other rooms of their house.
Mhm.
You know, you're hearing random like, yeah, bro, the scene is hardcore. You know,
Yeah.
and then to go back to uh the sexual situations, you have to understand that there was a lot of this is high level disparity and deprivation.
Mhm.
So, and then there's also a high level of insanity. And one thing about insanity with humans is called mass hysteria.
Mhm.
Usually with humans, with one motherfucker, one person want to act out, the rest of them feel as if they got the right to act out as well.
Mm.
So, since there's so much insanity going on in the land, people start doing whatever they want to do and be,
Yeah.
you know, creative in
Mm.
the household with those who are in the household, whatever
Mhm.
happens, because of also the levels of fear, also the levels of wanting to feel some form of security. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Sex provides all of that. There's a form of worship, there's a form of nurture, and the deprivation levels were so high that they were definitely struck into a mentality of whoever I can get any form of inkling of a kiss or a letter or any form of
Mm.
attention, then I'm going to hold that as dear to my heart as much as possible. Because I don't know if this person can make it back. I don't know if my brother is going to be able to make it back from the market. Yeah, you have to understand that there was no situation of plague that I've read where somebody survived past this maybe about 3 days. The
Wow.
majority of the plague situations, death occurred from 24 to 72 hours. There was
Wow.
some where it may take about a week or two to rehabilitate, but then again, there was such a hard situation of discovering some type of defense mechanism for it,
Mm.
which they tried everything from, you know, from taking frogs and dehydrating frogs and putting the frog on the pus bump and thinking it was supposed to suck up the pus. You know, they were doing stuff like that. They were, you know, the first form of cough drop was, I think, dog feces
Wow.
with a little honey, little honey
Wow.
added to that, and they took that for the throat for the colic.
Wow,
And
man. That's crazy, man. Yeah,
yeah, and bro, I mean, that's why people. That's I guess that's why indirectly, you know, the human psyche just shuts down and just joins groups and keeps herself limited because
yeah.
you keep on asking questions about the, you know. But I mean, you see this type of activity with African tribes. They
Yeah.
take cow excrement, rub it all over their bodies. They use it for their paint. They use it for their. They use cow urine for their paint as well. You know, they
Yeah.
use cow urine to blonde their hair.
Yeah.
So, uh,
I mean, it's tough stuff, man. I mean, coming out of that, it's like, I mean, it's just so, yeah, because I was kind of thinking about like, were there any practices like I don't know if those things were ever really recorded, but were there any practices that developed in the plague, like fetishes that exist now?
um, like I said, I'm pretty sure necrophilia, coprophilia, and I'll probably even throw in incest probably heightened during the plague situations.
Yeah.
And yeah, but you can find necrophilia cases all the way back down in Greece.
Yeah.
So I haven't read anything about coprophilia. Well, I wouldn't. Well, I don't know the word for just. I guess golden showers would be the word.
Yeah.
But you know, coprophilia is feces. So golden showers is all the way in Greece, but I haven't found anything dealing with you know, feces or anything like that. But during the medieval times, um, it was definitely there. There, you could see it indirectly by the comfort of the conditions. You can also see it by some of the healing mechanisms that they were using. So, for instance, um, one of the healing mechanisms to be used during the plague was to sleep with a stinking goat. And yeah, and they thought because the pus bumps from the plague was so stank that sleeping with a stinking goat would protect them from the stank, you know. And then this same individual over time would only get with a girl that stunk like a goat, and that was the only thing that turned him on was a girl that stunk like a goat.
So with the pus bumps, let's talk about that for a second, a little bit more detail. What was that about? Like, how did that work? Like these pus bumps, were they
Oh well,
big
pus
inside?
bump. Well, they were the majority of them that's been recorded were definitely mentioned to be during close to your lymph nodes, your armpit area, and your groins.
Wow.
So your inner thighs and all of that. Yeah. And sometimes these pus bumps could get to about the size of say about a cantaloupe maybe.
Wow.
You know, a large apple, and they would emanate black pus. You know, sometimes they would grow into hard shells, but like you have to understand what it's all noted in the book, the different plagues and the different symptoms that were shown for that plague. Because I'm briefing you over a multitude of different plagues that occurred, and they all had different disease.
symptoms. Yeah,
different diseases and stuff.
because I remember seeing something on YouTube where this guy, this was Martinelli, I think he was out in India, but he had a bump on him that was probably the size of like a cantaloupe, literally. He was carrying with him. And the guy kept having to move it. I mean, it was just really like, what is this? You know what I'm saying? You know, like, yeah. I don't have the stomach for that sort of thing. I'm so happy that I'm born in the era that I'm born in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
I got pictures. I got pictures in the 1800s where it's a big old pus bump. Dude had to put a canister tube in the pus bump for the pus to come out. He put it.
yeah, that's crazy.
He stuck a tube in the motherfucker. So you know, yeah. I mean, it gets real crazy when you
Because you're carrying around this whole weight. I mean, in a lot of ways, you know, like you said, there's different diseases and stuff, and I get like in the stomach, there's this whole thing with the pot belly and all that sort of thing. But I mean, when it gets to like a pus bump and it gets huge like that, man, it's definitely like carrying another entity with you because it seems like that thing just evolves into something distinct from the body.
That is kind of funny you said that because a lot of the plague mentality fell into that. And they fell into, caricatizing their pus bumps and fall in love with the pus bump. Like I said, once that's where vaccinations came from. Vaccinations came from the Pope's pus bump being the holy pus and drinking the holy pus bump. Yeah, because...
Wait, hold on a second. Let me run this back again. So, okay, let's talk about vaccinations. That's an interesting thing that you mentioned just for a minute. So how did the vaccinations come about again? I got to hear this again. With the Pope and all this?
Yeah, drinking the pus of Pope.
Wow.
Because you have to understand that the Pope is of old age because he is closer to God. That's why they have an affliction with babies, loving babies, and all this pedo stuff going on, is because babies came directly from God. So they're divine and holy, and they're unscathed, and they're pure in their human essence, right?
Wow. Man, it's a lot learning today, man. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, that's part of it. That's where vaccinations do stem from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. That's all plague talk. Yeah.
That's it.
And yeah, that's basically about it. You know,
so
there's more details to it that I'll be bringing out later. But go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't want to touch on so much that the reader doesn't have anything to read, but definitely like to get like a general idea, because I know your writing. There's a lot of information in those books. You know what I'm saying? So it's like a lot of deep stuff that probably would take a minute to process. You know what I'm saying? So, but it's good to be able to talk with you to kind of get a little bit more insight into the information that's written and just general history about it. Because, like, a lot of times, stuff like that doesn't really come up in conversation that deals with history, that deals with the trials and tribulations of people. It's just supposed that the way it is today, is what it was before, or there was some utopia going on that no one seems to have been able to validate. You know what I mean? So
there was no utopia, brother.
No.
And it's kind of funny because now that I think about it, with this whole little place situation that we're in right now, and the whole pedo thing that is arising up is in synchronicity. People are locked up in the house with their children because of the whole plague.
Wow.
Yeah, So there's going to be, if a lot of people don't have mental control. A lot of people don't have self-control, and a lot of people don't have sociology. Okay, we have to understand that a lot of these elements that I'm speaking to you about were commonly known in society. Being a grown man at 30 years old and not having a woman in your house, you were automatically classified as a weirdo. As a matter of fact, the majority of medieval cities didn't allow their prostitutes to get past the age of 20, 25, or 30 at the least. And what would happen is if she didn't find a man or a husband by the age of 30, they'd get one of the male vagabonds and force them to, the city would pay for the marriage. And she would be married off and have a house with the vagabond.
Wow.
Yeah. And they would have to live like that, because medieval towns were not about allowing any random woman to be walking around over the age of 30. And they also looked at her sort of as like a burden to the community. Wow. So to indirectly shift off the burdenhood, they placed her with a man who then she becomes the man's burden and not necessarily the neighborhood's burden.
I see.
You see? Because they only wanted beautiful prostitutes, And the beauty of the prostitutes were representing the beauty of their city is how they looked at it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was part of the prostitutes' responsibilities in some cities to take care of the teenagers for free. And they got paid by the state to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, they got paid.
I do know that, like in Babylon, like in my studies in Mesopotamian history, a woman would serve as a temple priestess, which also meant sacred prostitution. She was engaged in sacred prostitution. So I guess that the role of prostitution, that's probably like a whole other show. You know what I'm saying? Discussing the role of prostitution.
Yeah, it is, because there's a large prostitute section in Volume 3 that deals with the Catholic, the Jewish, and the Muslim prostitutes and the Christian prostitutes, and they were all different. So
yeah, we definitely should approach that, soon. You know what I'm saying? But right now with the plague, that's very vital, especially in retrospect to what we're dealing with. So, like, because I'm curious because of how intense the plague was, and how humanity was able to come out of the plague. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Like, now I guess in this glimpse of it, it's sort of like people wonder, okay, about the economy, you know, food shortages, you know, that could occur after this, you know, whatever, different things of that nature. But I think at that time being much more intense, I mean, the struggle to kind of come out to some sort of comfortability, if it could happen in their lifetime, was extremely intense in retrospect to what these people had to endure as far as plague was concerned. Now that does bring up something that I do want to ask you about to touch on is because we I know last week we spoke about how plagues have a mind of their own, but was other than the moral basis, was there something that people was doing, or I mean, I don't think it's a specific thing, but could you name a couple of things that people may have been doing to incite plague?
Oh, to incite plague.
Yeah.
Um, well, there were highwaymen is what they called, and also they were called housebreakers. The highwaymen and the housebreakers. So highwaymen, they would come by, you know, and come to a small village, and they would poison the wells.
Wow.
They take ingredients that supposedly they got from the devil, and they put them in a little sack, and they stick it inside the wall of the wells, and the waterway goes through the whole city, and then
Mhm.
it poisons everybody. And then they go through the little town and steal whatever the hell they want. And they go to the neighboring town and trade it, get money, whatever the case. Housebreakers were known to do that too. Witches were also known to poison, supposedly just for the hell of it. But then again, poisoning was supposedly the female's art of being a killer. And there is much poisoning that occurred throughout all of Europe. Old Europe, they even had poison rings, and they would have poison inside of a ring, and they would drop it into your food while holding your food to you, giving you your food and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, besides that, you got the Jews that would poison the Christians, and the Christians would poison the Jews. They were at
Mm,
constant war.
mm.
I've never read any documents of Muslims doing any poison, but
Right.
yeah, there was also cases of criminals uh, putting poison or whatever the case, you know, ingredients to encourage plague on doorknobs,
Mm.
on walkways. Um, what is another way they would do it?
That's
There's
pretty
a couple of stories on intentional transformation of plague because of love.
cool. Mhm.
Um, yeah, and
Wow.
you know it would the situation where they say the Black Death started off with carcasses being launched over the wall by uh, Genghis Khan's grandson during a war
Mhm.
is false. And the reason
Okay.
why it's false is because that information isn't stated nowhere in the 1700s and 1800s.
I
That
see.
information is only brought, right. That information is only stated from modern scholars, not scholars of old.
Mhm. I
Right.
see. So it's more of like a modern theory.
Right. Well, no, they're putting the cap on history.
I see.
You
I
know?
see this.
Because you have to understand if I say, oh, Muslims launched bodies all over the wall, that already fits within the scope of your psyche on how you look at Muslims. So it
Mhm.
works.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
They already set your brain up to look at Muslims with the beard, with the long nose, with the turban, blah 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 blah. And those images are also the similar images to the facial shapes of the devils in the medieval
Mhm.
paintings. They have long noses, long chins, long beards. You know, the Krampus has the beard, you know, all of that, which is actually coming from the Arabic or the Turkish people.
Mm. And that definitely segues into a final part of discussion on plague, at least in this segment, would be the um, the information itself. Why is it that we don't really, in your opinion, um, don't study plague? Because I know you mentioned someone trying to put a cap on the conversation, to kind of deal with today's reality to make everything polite.
Yeah, all of these things have been capped, basically. This is, somebody has put a top of capsule on.
And that's what makes the
that's all the way. That's what makes the West again.
That's what makes the hold on, staying with the internet connection. That's what makes Kicked Out of Heaven unique, because it pulls that cap off. You know what I'm saying? It pulls the cap off, and it allows the reader to see a real portrait of history that's not discussed. You know what I'm saying? Other than a couple of quick searches on the internet about the Black Death, you might get the death count, but it doesn't really get into exactly what was happening.
Because the insanity was so high. And the insanity was so high that it's hard to explain what was going on, because they don't thoroughly know what was all the way going on. And it's hard to balance it out based on the human biology. In order for you to explain how the people were responding to their environment, you also have to understand human biology, medical, and cause and effect. So, for instance, when we talk about the morbidness of the whole medieval situation, right? Let's go specifically to the executioners, right? In volume 2, I got a whole section on lead poisoning. Lead was used a lot. Lead is actually lead acetate. It looks like sugar and it tastes sweet. And it was used in wine. And that's dated all the way back to Greece. It was used in wine. So they definitely used it in the medieval times, as there is laws against its usage. But it was used. And this is where we also get a wake from when it comes to a funeral. Because usually uncle would have to wake up on the table from being knocked out from lead poisoning for 3-4 days. You see? Also, the licking of the paintbrush that you see Van Gogh doing. Van Gogh, who also did what? Cut off his ear? Right? Van Gogh did that, right?
Yeah.
The licking, the tapping of the paintbrush is because there was lead inside the paint.
I see.
That also made the paintings live. Now, why am I saying all of this about those facts of lead being inside? They also say Beethoven died of lead poisoning, I think it was. And lead, they come to find out, builds a sterility responsive towards violence. You will incite violence, and violence at its high extreme levels of slaughter. So when we look at the market and how they were able to handle execution and images for a long time, it's because they were psychologically altered by lead poisoning.
I see.
You see?
Yeah.
And this also deals with the geographics of the location as well. So when we look at the science of geographics, the Caucasian, when Europeans moved over here to America, they are actually a new being. They can hold on to what's in their blood in specific rituals. But guess one thing that I know personally from living in 4 different time zones, you will geographically alter to the nature of the location you're in. Right. You're going to alter your character, and how you operate is going to amalgamate to the location that you are at on this planet.
Yeah, you know? That's why, like, when you look at certain groups in, like, the Afrocentric community, a lot of them fail in the sense that when you study mankind's history, most people, when they move from a nation or forced to move from a nation, they take on a new identity that's distinct to describe the era. For example, there was a tribe, the Yamato tribes, when they left China, they went into Japan. They no longer were Chinese, they were Japanese, because they have a distinct new environment and a distinct new culture. If I sit with you and listen to a Slick Rick record, it's different than listening to a Slick Rick record with people who have the same physical shell as us, but live over 3,000 miles away. It's just different. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of why I think, as far as like people on this hemisphere, should just develop within their own and share the love with the rest of the human family. But it should be developed within them. Forget all that other crazy stuff, because it's you're in a different space. And if I'm not mistaken, ancient man also thought that he was a child of the stars. So wherever he was born, as far as the longitude, latitude, made him distinct from people born in other things, because he was getting a different vibration. You see what I'm saying? And so, um, you know, as far as going back and becoming something that was, in the same way, there's not an individual who has been resurrected from physical death. I doubt if a whole civilization could do the same thing. You know what I mean? But that was a good point that you said to spark that. So I thought I'd add that on, as far as like becoming a whole new being in a different sort of atmosphere. You know what I'm saying? So I think when people recognize that, there's a great legacy here that exists. Um, and the story of the continuum of where it's from could also be present, but it's a distinct legacy here. That definitely, in just a matter of a couple of centuries, is a lot of information. There's a lot of information, so it's really been really insightful on the matter of plague, man. This stuff is like, wow, it's totally exciting, and I'm looking forward to going into a third part. Before we get to a couple of other things in volume 3, I want to go a little bit further in volume 2 with the witches, the warlocks, the magic, to kind of get abreast on that, because today, um, even for myself, I was under the impression, for the most part, that witches were doing their thing, and the church always came down on them. And then later, as I started studying history, I realized that witches could have been viable to bring negative energy, and also was the underworld at that time. This is what, so
Um. Oh, you want me to lean in on that?
you can lean in on it. I mean,
Oh,
but I
okay,
also,
okay.
but I also heard too, before you began, we also, I think most people heard that witches were healing people, and so that's why they were sought after. So I've heard like two different stories. I think it depends on the country and the time period, but yeah, you can go in on that, like what was going on in the movies,
They're
whatever.
never gonna really tell you what the whole witch dynamic is. The
Mhm.
witch dynamic is the fact that women have um some form of mystical invisible power. This mystical invisible power is found in their cells.
Mhm.
It's also found in their social skills
Mhm.
when it comes to their tactics of communication. Okay. And witches are developed by default because of what happens in society, and because the fact that the human is a tool making animal.
Mhm.
The human is a psychological animal. So we can put a lot of things in place that really don't need to be in place
Mhm.
in order for us to get from our A to Z. We can make things creative, or we can make things simple.
Mhm.
Now, witches are developed through a multitude of different routes. Um, First of all, they all have the capacity to be either a black witch or a white witch. The white witch is supposedly the good witch, and the black witch is supposedly the bad witch. But man cannot trust the white witch either way it goes, because she has the capacity and understanding to become the black witch. The definition of the witch is to stop man from his progression. That
Mhm.
is the bottom line. Now, This happens in a multitude of different ways. You have to understand women are double X chromosomes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have to understand that and today we don't really know what we're doing when it comes to pregnancy and the balance of estrogen and testosterone levels being against a male or a female embryo.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a female embryo that gets too much testosterone in its later stages will definitely have a body build of a man, okay? But it is in essence a female.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this body build of a man will leave her what? Less unattractive. It will leave her neglected. Will she still be sought for sex? Yes. Will she get the accolades that usually most beautiful women get? No. Okay. Through this, will she get pregnant? Most likely, yes. Will she get pregnant because a mistake? Could be. Will she get pregnant by her own, by force? Most likely, yes. If it's a beastly looking female, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Through this neglect of society and her love being neglected, but yet she is still used as a woman, and also now she is used more so for workload because she doesn't have the accolades of the beautiful girl. Guess what she falls into by the time she's 50?
The old man.
Disgruntled, angry mode. Yeah, menopause, hysteria. Her sex life has been garbage. You know, she was only used. She's never experienced love. You see, so this by default will fall her into a position of hatred towards males. You see what I'm saying? And then she'll train other little girls to only use men for their money, or she might keep little girls around to keep other male company around by selling the little girls to the men. You have to understand that also during the medieval times, prostitution was controlled by a female called the procuress. Okay, and it was a female who was doing the pimping during those times, and you'll see that in a lot of cases here in America, that women sell their daughters, you know, and they sell their daughters to the man to keep attention around and keep money flowing, because the man isn't going, even though the woman could use her own sexual advancements to stop all of this type of activity, she doesn't, and she doesn't for a multitude of reasons. She doesn't want to fall into a bad social space. She doesn't want to lose the capacity of her youth, because the more sexual or the more orgasms a woman has, or even a male, they're aging themselves. You see what I'm saying? So that's one route on how a witch can get developed. The second route a witch gets developed is being raped as a child. They'll develop into older age with hatred towards males. You see what I'm saying? And want to destroy men, basically. So that's where that comes from. The elements of magic, especially with this inclusion of medicine and influence on medicine, definitely heightened during the whole during the whole Black Death, okay, and continued on. So when we talk about the magic mirrors, the crystal balls, and all of that stuff, which stems from Egypt, ancient Greece, Rome, all of those areas, you know, it was definitely heightened during this time period. And so did, and this is also right around the corner from 1347. The first witch burning, I think, took place in like 1412 or something like that. Wow. So it was right around the corner, right? Because, like I stated, a lot of women didn't die during the plague. So by default, over time, they started looking at women as, yo, y'all got some mystical power, y'all some type of witch or something. Why ain't y'all dying and everybody else is dying? You know. So there's a degree of that thought that got women classified underneath that cloak, you know. So yeah.
Wow, that's deep stuff there. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, and we're definitely going to get more into that aspect next week, because that's a whole other body of work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the witches is it's funny you said it like that, because the plague section in the volume 2 is 200 to 300 pages.
Yeah.
You know, the witches, I think that's about a solid 100 pages.
Yeah.
Book altogether is 666 pages.
Yeah, that's a lot of work there. You know what I mean? That's a lot of work, and that's 8 by 11. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like sometimes
these are big body books.
Yeah.
This ain't no.
Yeah, that's 8 by 11.
Serious.
which is
Work.
like,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna chop that down to like 5 by 8 or something. And I read
Mhm.
because I've seen the font. The font is not large. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's not overly large. So usually, like if I'm writing, you know, I mean, I can do, you know, some pages, but I know like a 300 5 by 8 is probably like 100 and some odd pages 8 by 11. So when you have like 600 pages on an 8 by 11, it's well worth it because that's like about 1,200 pages of what you would see in a normal size book. You know what I'm saying? So that's a lot of work, man. But it's good because it gives
Mhm.
people a collection, a legacy to definitely follow. You know what I'm saying? So tonight we had a trying to get this thing straight with the net. We had a couple of issues, but I think we're good now. In and out with the Wi-Fi. But yeah, it's been an honor once again. Keenan Booker, aka the God 720. This is me, Sal Bay, aka Warlock Asylum, coming at you once again with another episode of Raw Talk. Peace.
Peace.